So I have to admit it, I like to listen to salsa music while cooking because it's just the perfect vibe. It's bouncy, it's active, it tempts you to dance, or in my case, cook. It encompasses the atmosphere of the kitchen wonderfully for me. See, cooking is an active activity. There's all sorts of sizzling and bubbling, different things all in their own timer. You're constantly having to keep switching between different pots and pans and keep on top of them, lest you want to burn your food. So, why does the soundtrack of Arctic Eggs consist almost entirely of softer tunes, all of which are gentle, atmospheric, absolutely wonderful songs in their own right, but they have no place in a cooking game, right? It almost feels inappropriate to cook to this music. Like, the way the guitar is plucked on the song Blizzard makes it sound like whoever's playing it is discovering the instrument for the first time, which can't be right. Cooking isn't about slow experimentation. It's about deciding on a recipe and ingredients ahead of time and trying to perfectly execute that. Mission is a bit more energetic. It's still mellow. It's something you nod your head to, sure, but it doesn't inspire much immediate action beyond that. It's lovely and ambient again, but jazz is still freeform. It's still a bit too wild, emotional, and unprepared for a kitchen space. The art style is similarly inappropriate. I think it's fantastic. It's a beautiful setting, but it's too cold, it's too dirty, it's too disorderly and psychedelic. Cooking shouldn't be done in dirty alleyways, dance floors lost in pink fog, or walkways between high-rises. It should be done in sterile, clean environments with proper lighting and properly heated. You don't want your food going all cold and nasty, of course. While both are present, the story and lore seem to take a backseat in this exchange. Characters occasionally chat about current events in the world or discuss the past, giving you some insight into when and where we are, but it all kind of seems like backdrop, an explanation for the bizarre appearance of characters and the state of the world, but it kind of doesn't really serve any deeper purpose past that point. Characters often chatter aimlessly. Dialogue is only present as a vehicle for very dry, bizarre humor, which is genuinely really funny, but it's still ultimately not the focus. And I've hesitated to talk about gameplay before anything else because... how could I put this? If the shell of the egg is bizarre and unusual, one can only assume that the yolk itself will continue this trend. I'm honestly lost as to what Arctic Eggs as a game even is. All of what I've said so far leans into the idea that Arctic Eggs is a cooking game, which it literally is. You do cook food in it, but it's unlike any other game in its genre. Games like Overcooked, like hell, even some of the Cooking Mama entries are much more accurate to the kitchen. They're active and tense. They have stakes. Recipes are either done correctly or done incorrectly. You win or you fail. There's no endless retrying without a gap like in Arctic Eggs. And while it might appear to be one, it's not really a puzzle game, nor is it even really a test of skill. Puzzle games have a pretty simple setup. You begin, consider all the elements and how they're going to interact with each other. You make them interact in a way that suits your goal. You win. Oftentimes they rely on a trick. You learn or notice something as you play and use that to succeed. There's typically an, oh, I understand now moment. But there's not much to understand in Arctic Eggs. New items and foods are introduced to the pan as you progress, and there is not much to consider or understand. Often items are pretty self-explanatory. The issue then becomes that most of these challenges can be beaten quite quickly. There's not much skill element present. How long a challenge will take you is typically up to the whims of the physics of the pan. It might just be because they're the most present item in the game, but I've noticed that the eggs are like the biggest culprit of this. They can go from being slick and slidey to feeling weighted and sticky. Objects that fall on top of the eggs are an especially bad case of this. Sometimes they will slide right off the top of the egg, or they'll get stuck, almost glued to the yolk. If you try to look towards the difficulty settings as a source of understanding, you find that the difficulty only changes the type of pan that you have, which is a really creative idea, but it's a confusing one. You have a more exaggerated wok-shaped pan as the easy mode, then a more standard one for normal, then the hard is basically just a flat plate of metal. Thing is, in practice, these are 3 tools rather than 3 levels of difficulty. I found that some levels are very, very easy with the hard flat pan, while some levels were actually quite difficult using what is supposed to be the easy pan. After 100% completing the game, I kinda just sat there, more so confused by what I had played rather than satisfied. Games are supposed to have some level of complexity to them, a skill to, sharpen over time, just like cooking does. But if I played Arctic Eggs all over again, I'd probably play it no faster than my first playthrough. Cooking is a high energy, difficult task. It's a skill to develop. Cooking is always very hectic, always needing to be done as quickly and as perfectly as possible, but is it? Like, so much media I've been watching surrounding cooking focuses so much on the challenge, the intensity, the speed, the whole cutthroat nature of it all. So I think the reason I sat baffled, so confused that I felt insulted, is because at that moment, I didn't realize that what I'd been exposed to is just an alternative perspective. In the real world, cooking is quite unpredictable too. Like, you can obviously get better at cooking, but there's still an element of uncontrollableness. Like, even master chefs mess up their most popular recipes, because it's not just about executing a task, or in this case, a recipe, as perfectly as possible. There's lots of little improvements at play. Last second decisions to add a little bit more seasoning, or let something stew for another few moments. To make original recipes requires a willingness to experiment at a slow pace, testing and dumping until you get it just right. So in those cases, maybe it's more appropriate to listen to something more slow and relaxing while cooking. If the final meal is supposed to be enjoyable, the process to make it can be too, surely. Obviously, you still need to keep on top of things and make sure nothing's burning, or especially nothing's raw. But I think it's healthier to allow yourself to just calm down, relax into the process, and not act like your life is on the line every single time you're heating a pan. So perhaps that's what Arctic Eggs is, after all. It's an expression of a feeling, an alternative look I haven't considered on a hobby I've only viewed through the lens of, competitiveness and cutthroat perfectionism. Or, as a task that is to be completed quickly, purposefully, and effectively without spectacle or reverence. Or maybe it's just about frying eggs on Mount Everest. I can't believe the game that, gives me a whole new outlook on cooking as a hobby is also a game where you cook, living blocks of flesh and whole bottles of beer. It's like if you realized that you want to be an astronaut after watching 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's like, yeah, that's cool that you realize that, but that's where you realize that that's what you want to happen to. Okay, all right.